A defiant man is God's enemy. The second point this morning, sometimes God has to knock us down to get our attention. Sometimes He has to knock us down to get our attention. Look again at verse 3 in our text. As he journeyed, he came near Damascus, and suddenly a light shone around him from heaven. As Saul approached the gates to the city of Damascus, suddenly there was this great light from heaven that flashed around him. And it was no ordinary light. According to Paul's own accounts, this happened about noon. In chapter 22, verse 6, Paul writes, "Now it happened as I journeyed and came near Damascus at about noon, suddenly a great light from heaven shone around me." And then in chapter 26, in verse 13, he writes, "At midday, O king, along the road I saw a light from heaven, brighter than the sun, shining around me and those who journeyed with me." It was obvious to Paul and with his traveling companions that this was not an ordinary flash of light. This was not just a flash of lightning. This was from heaven. And it was sent to get his attention. At noon, the brightest part of the day, this light was so bright that it knocked him to the ground. Such an intense flash that he fell to the ground, most likely from a horse. This is very similar to the type of reaction we read about in the Old Testament from those who experience similar divine visitations. And then, as we continue in our text in verses 4 and following, "Then he fell to the ground and heard a voice saying to him, 'Saul, Saul, why are you persecuting me?' And he said, 'Who are you, Lord?' The Lord said, 'I am Jesus, whom you are persecuting. It is hard for you to kick against the goads.' So he, trembling and astonished, said, 'Lord, what do you want me to do?' And the Lord said to him, 'Arise and go into the city, and you'll be told what you must do.'" Can you imagine how Saul must have felt? Who in heaven could he be persecuting? He was God's servant. He was one of the greatest of God's servants in his own eyes. Remember, he was filled with that pride. And he asked, "Who are you, Lord?" And he probably meant the word Lord in a very general sense, as referring to a heavenly messenger of some sort. He probably didn't even know he was speaking to Jesus because he asked, "Who are you?" Christ didn't waste any time answering that question. And Saul could have no doubt now that he was seeing and hearing the Lord Jesus himself. Sometimes we get to the point where we have to be knocked down for God to get our attention in order to see Jesus. Has God ever knocked you down and used that as an opportunity to get your attention?